Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be painting up the Leman Russ battle tank from the Solar Auxilia box set, and I'm also going to be sharing some ideas, philosophies, hints, tips and techniques to make yours stand out on the battlefield. So firstly, before we even add any paint onto this miniature, I want to talk about adding your own little personalization onto your miniatures to make them stand out on the battlefield. And for this, I've not gone crazy. I've literally just added some jeweler's chain and some sandbags to the back of it, and these were specifically from the Tamiya range. Also, if you want to go crazy and add other little bits and bobs, feel free to do that. I do recommend painting this in sub-assembly. For this, the front, like, I want to call it a snow shovel, that is separate, just blue tacked on, and obviously the twist on the mount on the turret at the top, that does come off as well, and it just makes life so much easier. Now, before we get into my actual paint scheme and the one that you saw on the thumbnail, originally I wanted to paint this up in more of like a camo khaki green colour, and as I started to put this paint on, and then like I always do, go onto like Instagram to get some like weathering inspiration and stuff, I came across Cult of Paint's new video on this tank, and I was like, oh shit, and I realised that we'd pretty much done the same colour scheme. Even though we used different paints, it looked very similar to that, so I scrapped that, primed it back up, and off we go. But if you want to know that colour scheme, then the paints for that will be linked in the description below. So yeah, so originally you can prime this however you want. You know, for this I used black, or if you noticed in the video, I did it in Hyrax brown first of all. This is because I was originally going to use some like chipping fluid on it and stuff, and that were going to act as the rust underneath. But in end, I just decided on this colour scheme and went for black. So the colour scheme that we actually ended up with was Tamiya Nato black as a base coat, and then all I did was add a tiny little bit of this medium grey. First of all, just add a couple of drops to it, and then you want to finish off so it's like a 50-50 mix. So you want to like progressively add a little bit, and then for your final highlight you're going to add that medium grey as a 50-50 mix with the Nato black. And again, when you're airbrushing this all your way around, is I'm not like highlighting from like a zenithal, I'm just sort of going in to each of the panels and getting those highlight areas, you know, sort of where the light would hit, and like sort of going into the middle, like them little doors on the side and stuff. We're just literally going to like spray into the middle of those, and again, it might not be exactly where the light hits, but again, it just creates that like visual highlight and that difference to separate those panels up. And then if you want to get a little bit fancy at masking things off and spending ages masking them off, because it is a bit tricky if you want to, you know, add these stripes and stuff, it might just be me being paranoid, and so I don't get stuff onto other areas. I just went on and sprayed some stripes, and this was literally just using Tamiya flat white and then some AK deep red for the red parts. Now at this point, we want to get everything based out, and I don't want to spend ages in this video going through every single thing that I based out up to this point. So we're going to base everything minus the metallics, because I want to do the metallics a little bit different, because we're going to use some varnishes and things like that to give a little bit of surface variation finish, so that everything doesn't all look like the same across the miniature. You've got a nice surface variation going across, you know, like your metallics to like your actual paint job. So get everything based out. This is like your pipes and all that other little bits and bobs, or like your missiles and stuff, but don't do the metallics. Then you can also add on there little things like your decals and stuff if you want to do that. I've not added any varnishes at this point. If you want to add a gloss varnish to get the decals, you know, slipping about and doing stuff, because I didn't add that many, I didn't feel that were necessary, and I just used Microset and Microsol, gave them, you know, like a little bit of time to dry whilst I was base coating everything else out, including the sandbags. So the sandbags, I base coated them out in Steel Legion drab, and then I gave them an entire dry brush of Karak stone. So at this point you should have everything sort of like based out, all like your pipes and your colours and stuff, but don't do your metallics at this point. But once you've done all that, we want to start to shift the tone of the like the armour and all the colour. We're going to add a really nice little bit of subtle weathering that we can go over a little bit later on. Now this part. It's quite important, but it's just going to act subtly in the background for later on when we do our weathering. Now, if you've never heard of oil dot filtering, this is just a case of getting all different oils, dotting them around like polka dots all over your miniature, and then getting a clean, dry brush, putting a tiny little bit of mineral spirits on there, and then just swooshing it up and down to mix that in. Like it's going to be like a bit streaky, or sometimes you can push it in and it's just going to act as like a little bit of subtle mottling around the miniature. Because if you look at real tanks and things like that, you know, as these things get grimed up and dirt, they're not all the same colour across the tank. But again, this is just a slight bit of like undertone that's going to add to our weathering a little bit later on throughout the video as we get into it. But if you want to know all these oils that I've used, you know, just pick what. You don't have to use the ones that I've used. These are Abtalon 502 oils, but I will list the ones that I've used in the description below. But any sort of like dirt and rust and stuff is really good. You don't want to overload it with these. You know, this is, again, we're just going for subtle, I can't even say it. You just want them to look subtle in the background for this, and again, it's just going to add to it a little bit later on in the video. And then give everything a gloss varnish. Now, I know I've sort of rushed over these base coats and this oil dot filtering. It is an important stage to go through, but I don't want to sit here hours on this video going through every single colour and every little way that I did everything on it, because I don't want to waste your time. But again, it's just a little step that we're going to add, and it's all going to build to this end game. Really quickly, I want to talk about this week's sponsor, which is me. Are you tired of all the women texting you? Are you tired of fighting girls off? Yeah, me neither. I don't have a clue what that feels like. However, I want to tell you about my affiliate links, and these are in the description below. If you want to get some of the materials and stuff that you've seen in this video, then you can check them out. I've got some FIRESTORM games and Element games where you can get some great discounted products, so please check them out, and it helps me out as well and gives me a little bit of return on the channel. So thanks guys for this week's sponsor, and let's get back to the video. So now on the tank, we're going to move on to our oil pin wash, and because we've done that gloss varnish, first of all, this is really going to help that surface tension, and it's going to run into all those crevices. So as you can see here, I've got these little trays that I just blob some rust colours, some oil paints. This can literally be any rust colours, but please get a nice little bit of different variation of colours in them, like Burnt Umber or Abtalon 502s. I've got like some light ones, orange ones, a bit more browny ones, but you can literally use any. And then it's just a case of just being so random with this and just dipping and dabbing them and just letting it run into all those crevices. And this is quite a time consuming part, just because, you know, you're doing all like the different bolts and stuff. But I always think that when you do this like rust color on black armor, especially if you're doing more like the Grimdark style, it just really stands out and separates it. And it will dry a little bit sort of brighter, but again, a bit later on, obviously, we are going to knock that down slightly. And then the bonus of that is when, you know, when it comes to removal process, like you can see parts on here where it's like sort of going out and puddling onto other areas, this can be easily wiped away. And such as you just saw there, I didn't even let it run into crevices, I just literally wiped it all over. And if it filters that part, I'm not too fussed, because it's as though like the rust has stained certain areas. But just literally be random with it, you know, use your different pots and dipping and dabbing here, there and everywhere in all the different colours to get that nice variation. And then you can just clean up like this with a bowl of mineral spirits and a sponge or a cotton swab, and just wipe away some of that excess if you don't like it, because that's the beauty of oil paints, where you can just wipe them away if you don't like the look of it. And then you want to give that a little bit of time to dry before we move on to our next stage. So after you've done your oil wash, it is probably a good idea to seal those in with a varnish. Now, I've used two varnishes on this. I've used a satin varnish and also a matte varnish, and I've literally just sprayed them into random areas. So parts of it might be matte, some of it might be satin, just again to get that surface variation. Now we're going to move on to the metallic areas. Now for this, there's no specific metallic that I'd recommend. There's not many good ones out there on market, but just go for like a mid-tone metallic to base coat everything out on. For this, I used plate mail Metal by Army Painter. It is actually an air paint, but please you don't have to go out and get this one. You know, like lead belcher, anything like that is going to be absolutely fine for the base coat and the first, you know, metallic pass that we're going to do. This includes all your chains and any areas that you do want to be metallic. The tracks we'll come to in a little bit because I did them a little bit different. We'll get into them a bit later in video. But once you've base coated them out, you can, if you want to, use your oil wash again to get those rusty colours. But what I like to do is create a bit of like variation across my miniature. And again, you know, we're always trying to achieve that surface variation that I keep going on about. And for my washers, I actually used thinned down with water contrast paints. Now, you know I always go on about rattling grime. This is one of my favourite ones to do, but I mixed it up with this. So I actually used a little bit of rattling grime. Then I used some dorkoth flesh to like put some like hints of like rust in there, and then Griphhound orange for some more like rustic areas. Once they've all dried, you need a brighter silver or like a brighter metallic colour. I used rung fang steel, and I just dry brushed them all over my metallic areas, and that is your metallic areas done. If you do want to take it up a little bit, as you can see in the video on this one, I actually, you know, for like the chains and stuff, I really wanted them to be rusty as though they're just really worn down over time, and this was just using Dirty Downs rust. Now the tracks, to be honest, it was a little bit of experimentation, but the actual colour scheme that I did settle on was I base coated and dry brushed them all. I wanted them to be like a bit of a rustic at first, and then towards the end of the video, because you'll see throughout the video that they do look a bit rusty towards the end, but then I tone everything down a little bit because I weren't quite happy how they stood out too much. But essentially, what you want to do for your tracks is dry brush and base coat them all in Rhinox hide, and then get a little bit of Mornfang brown and dry brush that all over the top. And then I will speak a bit more about pigment powders a little bit later on as we get into the weathering side, but just thin them down with water and let like some different rustic colours and browns, if you've got some pigment powders, run into those, you know, like some dusty colours as well. And then I gave it all a dry brush of Castellax Bronze by Citadel. And then to finish everything off, because again it was still a little bit bright and rusty, at the end of the video I just went over them with a coat of rattling grime just to knock them down. Now I know that was a little bit. Again, you don't have to do the pigment powder parts if you don't have pigment powders. This is just an additional bit of weathering if you want to add that to it. So it's Rhinox hide, Mornfang brown, add some weathering if you want to add some weathering to them. Give it the dry brush of the bronze, and then rattling grime over the top of it, thinned with water to finish them off, and you'll get some nice looking dirty tracks. Now, speaking of weathering, we might as well move on to that at this stage. For all the areas, we want to get a bit of chipping on there now. So for areas that are not like the black greys, I used Rhinox hide just to go in there with a bit of like, you know, like sponge chipping and with the brush. And then for your black areas, because like your Rhinox hide doesn't really show up too well on like the black areas, I just went back to our metallic colours, like our base metallic colour or like lead belcher or whatever, and just by hand I just went in, and all areas that, you know, you want to chip and dink up, we just went in and just dotted and added little bits to all the edges just to chip the armour. We didn't go overboard with this, you know, it's just another additional subtle piece of weathering that you can add to your miniature. And, you know, take your time on this, be random, and just go in there and splodge and spot all those little bits of chips here, there and everywhere. Now we're going to add some additional rust streaks, and for that I just got some different enamels. This was like AK rust streaks, you've got like Sector Rust by Villainy Inks, and again this would just, I got some different ones just to add some different tones, and if you want to use Dirty Downs rust you can do that as well. And it's just a case of dotting them round and adding some additional rust streaks for some of the heavier rusted areas. And again, we're adding layers upon layers of weathering towards the miniature. Now finally, some final parts of weathering before we get into some additional details that I added to this piece is, again, we're going to go back to the pigment powders. Now if you want to learn a little bit more about pigment powders and what you can actually do with them, then please go and check out the video that I did before this on the Heavy Sentinel, and I talked about them, but I've just got some different coloured like pigment powders, and I'm mixing these with some with water, some with you know, like your varnishes, like gloss varnishes and matte varnishes for some muddy areas, and I'm just splodging these like we did earlier on the tracks and to the bottom areas of the actual miniature. Now, if you might see that on this there are some nice rusted areas. If you want to learn more about the rust, I've done a video specifically on rust if you want to go and check them out, and also my Dirty Downs Rust masterclass where you can go and check them out as well. But again, we're just going around with a couple of different pigment powders, adding these chunks to them, and that brings us to the end of like the additional weathering. But we are going to go into some more details to add to your miniature to really make it pop and stand out. So this little product here is Gravel and Sand Fixer. It's a fantastic product by AK Interactive. Is what it does, it just literally fixes all those gravel and stuff to your actual like bases if you've got bases, or you know, like it really works good for this. So what I've got here around the sandbags, I've just got some sand from a little bit of pot what I normally use for basing, as though it's come out of the sandbags, and I'm just literally sprinkling this all over. And then what I do is I apply the gravel and sand fixer over the top of that. It goes on wet, and then it adheres it to it in some sort of way, and it dries clear so it doesn't affect the finish or anything like that. And then all the way around like other parts of the miniature, as though like dirt and a bit of that muck's been chucked up onto the tank, I applied some kraut cover basing. This is a new like basing. I use them all the time, and I've got a video coming out on these because I think they're absolutely amazing. I'm just sprinkling little bits of like dirt and muck here, there and everywhere, and then using the gravel and sand fixer to make it stick and adhere to the actual miniature itself. Again, this is quite a toxic product, so you know take precautions like you would if you're airbrushing or using oils and enamels, because it is quite a strong smelling product. So again, just take those precautions with that as well. But I really think adding these to your miniature gives it that more realistic look, and you've got that like dirt and grime, and again we're just adding all these layers and layers upon layers to our miniature to really make it stand out and look realistic. So the final thing I want to talk about, and the final little additional details that you can add to your miniature, are lenses. Now the coloured ones like the red and green, if you want to learn this, go over to the Heavy Sentinel video, and I teach a couple of different ways that you can do them. However, this like lamp on the side of the tank itself, I wanted this to actually look like a lamp, even though it is a sort of glass lens on front, and we're going to be painting it in a similar style. I wanted it to look like a lamp that were actually turned off. You know, I didn't want to do like any OSLs or anything like that. I wanted it to look like a lamp that were turned off. And I'm quite impressed how it actually turned out, because it were a bit of trial and error, and I weren't quite sure how I could actually achieve it. So we'll quickly go over the colours, and then I'll get into the actual process of how I achieved it and some additional ending bits that I added to really make it stand out and pop. So I used AK Grim Brown as a base coat, then AK Dark Brown, and then I started to slowly add Xandri Dust, working my way up to Ice Yellow for some final pop highlights. Now when you're painting obviously lenses like this, or you know, like a highlighted piece of glass, you want to, because it's a circle, you want to do like a half moon shape highlight at the bottom, and then like a little circle as your brightest highlight at the top. So what we did, obviously we got the Grim Brown, and I started just working my way up through the colours and just like bitting and dabbing it and making sure that you are thinning, because you do want it to be like a smooth transition, and there's nothing to stop you going back and forth with these colours, you know, to smooth out that transition as you start to work your way up. So you've got like your centre bit is going to be a bit more on like the darker side. You've got your half moon shape at the bottom, and each like progressive layer that you go up, like highlight that you go up, you want to make that tighter and tighter and thinner as you go up, especially when you start mixing in the ice yellow. You just want to add a tiny little bit of that at the top as your final highlight. Now when I'd got to that stage, because that's how I normally paint my lenses, I weren't fully happy with it, because it didn't look like those like old lamps that you get. And I was like, oh, racking my brain, what can I do? So what I did is I got some of the Xandri Dust and thinned it down to a glaze consistency, and I just went over everything. So I just literally, I did 2 little layers of that just over everything, and for some reason it just created this really nice like yellow looking lamp, and it just fetched it all together, and to me it achieved the goal and the result that I actually wanted. And then to finish it off, I just gave it all a little coat of gloss varnish. And that brings us to the end of this tutorial. So as you can see with this one, I've not probably gone as crazy as I normally do with like the mud splats and everything up the side of it, and gone super crazy with the rust at the bottom of it. But everything and every little layer that we've done and added, you don't have to do everything that we've done in this video, but everything can all sort of be this subtle weathering that we can add to our miniatures, and you can apply this to like your normal space marines and stuff. But yeah, you know, I'm really happy with how this turned out. And I'm really looking forward to doing some more tanks and vehicles in the future with this. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and guys, honestly, it'd help me out so much if you could just hit that like button, if you want to leave me a comment, and if you're new to this channel, then please hit that subscribe button. So yeah, you know, I can't thank you guys and this community enough for everything, especially over these past few weeks. If you saw my community post, honestly, this hobby and my fans and everything, I'm so blown away by everything, and I can't thank you guys enough for the support and stuff over these past, you know, like coming week and stuff. So thank you so much, guys, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. And yeah, see you soon.